Hi. Remember us? Special Report Online. It's been a while. Thanks for coming aboard. It's the first time joining us. Welcome. It's a great forum to continue the conversation with our panel. We want to hear from you, so please weigh in. Give us a comment, ask questions. Don't worry if you can't see it right away. Producers are trying to put it in as fast as you type it. We are here with Steve, Mara, and Matt. This is your first online, SR Online?
I'm frightened. What's going to happen?
It's the inaugural run. It's much more relaxed and easy. Joining us also from the White House, we have the privilege of our chief White House correspondent, John Roberts, joining us on SR Online on our Back in the Swing. John, I just want to first of all get your take on what it is like being chief White House correspondent for this White House.
It's slightly akin to drinking from a fire hose. Brett, you take a sip whenever you can. But, you know, I thought during the election campaign that if Donald Trump became president, that this would be the most interesting job in the world, and I have not yet been disappointed.
All right, so some of the panelists have questions, too. Steve?
Yeah, my question is, 6 weeks in, which single individual has the most influence on Donald Trump's thinking on a day-to-day basis?
I think it's probably Steve Bannon. He's the guy who's in literally every one of the high-level meetings. He's the guy. I really think that he is the Karl Rove, if you will, of this administration. He doesn't possess the same set of instantly attainable facts that Karl Rove has in terms of who won Hamilton County in 1992. But I think in terms of influence and in the narrative that's coming out of this White House, I think Bannon's probably got the most influence that anybody does.
All right, Mara?
So, John, I sit right behind John so I can actually send some spitballs to the back of his head. But I have a question about today's briefing, which left me kind of confused about where we are in the story about President Obama wiretapping President Trump. And Sean Spicer said two different things, and I'm wondering what you make of them. First, he said, this is what we're asking Congress to look into. Later on, he was passed a note from an aide, and he said, there's no investigation into Trump that we know of. So where do you think this stands?
Yeah, in an answer to a question from Margaret Brennan of CBS, he said, you know, she said, is he the subject of a counterintelligence operation? And he said, well, that's what we're trying to find out. That's why we're going to the intelligence committees to find out what is there. And then he was passed a note by Lindsey Walters, who's one of the deputy press secretaries, and he came back and he said there is no ongoing investigation of President Trump. I think Margaret's question was a little more nuanced. She wasn't necessarily asking whether there was any kind of a criminal investigation. She was asking if there was some sort of counterintelligence operation which could lead in a number of different directions. Where all of this is, Mara, as you know from being here today, is unclear. The president woke up on Saturday and he tweeted out what he tweeted, the allegations that President Obama had ordered some wiretapping of Trump Tower. Don't know if it was directed specifically at him, though I think he was intimating that. Took the staff by surprise. Nobody knew what he was talking about. I mean, what I'm gleaning from folks that I've talked to here, Mara, is that they threw this over to Congress so they could get it out of the White House because nobody wanted to talk about it, and they're just hoping it quietly goes away over there. But, you know, they keep kind of digging the hole a little bit deeper, which I think they did today.
Matt?
You know, I worked for a president who liked to work out a couple hours a day and go to bed early, and this president never stops. I keep thinking
he never works out either.
Yeah, he doesn't drink, he doesn't work out, and he seems to be up a lot. So what does that mean for the press corps? I mean, if just the amount of hours being put in by everybody in the West Wing there must be amazing.
Yeah, I'm trying to dial it back to 14 hours a day, but I don't know if I'll be able to. Yeah, I mean, God, it was the night that Flynn left. I was contacted at 10:30 at night. I was, I think, on my email at 11:30 the other night and back up at 5 o'clock in the morning. But it's kind of like it's like covering the Pentagon. Jen Griffin, the same thing. You know, Chad Pergram and Mike Emanuel up on Capitol Hill. They're sometimes going all night with what's going on up there. So it's just the sort of thing, Matt, where you get invested in it, and it's really kind of a 24/7 type of thing. And you hope, like the staff did, that they were going to have a quiet weekend, and then everything blows up in your face. So I've covered wars before, and while the threat level is different, the hours are about the same.
Hey, John, what about the question we were asking earlier about how much political capital do you think this president is going to invest in trying to sell the health care bill, even as it evolves in Congress?
I think he's got to probably sell as much as he's got, Brett, because he made that the signature issue, repeal and replace Obamacare. I guess there's a scenario under which you can say, look, I tried to do it, but Congress wouldn't buy. But if they repeal Obamacare and then they don't replace it with something else, that's going to be disaster in 2018. So I think if he gets the repeal across the finish line, they definitely have to do the replace, or it's going to be bad news 2 years from now in the midterms.
Yeah, a lot of people are typing in that they really love your tie, so that's the important stuff.
Well, that's very nice.
Yeah,
Thank you. Those are the most important things.
Yeah.
My wife will be pleased. She chose it for me.
Right. The ultimate decider here is President Trump on what to do with military decisions, but news that the Marines are on the ground in Syria is pretty big. Do you think, as we were talking about with the panel before, that we're going to hear this president vocalize, what's happening?
I think we're going to have to at some point. At the moment, he's entrusting James Mattis to make all the right moves, and that's the reason why he picked Mattis. He has absolute faith in him as the head of the Pentagon. Of course, when it comes to combatant commanders, it doesn't get much better than James Mattis. I tell you, though, that the president is avoiding the press right now. All of the events that he had today were closed. He appeared briefly on camera, I think, yesterday, but he does not want to get asked about what he tweeted out on Saturday. And I don't know when they're going to allow us access to him. I think they're going to have to wait for it all to blow over. But at some point, now that we really do have conventional boots on the ground and not just the Special Forces operators, I think he's going to have to say something about it, and probably pretty quick.
All right, John, as always, we appreciate your time, and thanks for the cameo on SR Online.
Appreciate that.
All right, we'll see you, buddy. Let's turn just to North Korea, because I think it's so big. Obviously, the Marines is the breaking news in Syria, but it seems just such a huge story, this North Korea situation. We've deployed these THAAD missiles to South Korea, and it's really made China upset. And they are the linchpin to getting, diplomatically, North Korea to do anything. But Mara, it seems like it's very tense.
Trump is not the first American president who has wanted China to do something about North Korea. I mean, North Korea is their client state, and American presidents feel like they should be able to keep them in line. China doesn't want North Korea to completely collapse, because then they'd have hundreds and thousands of North Koreans coming over the border. But it's a real problem. And apparently, as time ticks by, every single month, their capabilities grow to the point where at some point they will be able to send a missile to us, not just in the waters around Japan.
Yeah, let's take a listen to the State Department and the Chinese foreign minister today.
We remain open to dialogue with North Korea with the aim of returning to credible and authentic negotiations on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. North Korea's behavior has not been rational.
It is like two accelerating trains coming towards each other with neither side willing to give way. The question is, are the two sides really ready for a head-on collision? Our priority now is to flash the red light and apply the brakes on both trains.
Such a comforting soundbite, Steve. The two head-on trains from China.
No, I mean, first of all, the Chinese need to not make equivalence arguments about the United States and North Korea, please. There are things that we can do, and Donald Trump has talked about putting pressure on China with respect to trade, with respect to a number of other issues. There are things that we can do to push China quietly behind the scenes to not even do our bidding, do what's in the interests of, I think, the United States, allies in the region, and remove a threat, or at least diminish a threat in what we're seeing in North Korea. But it's discouraging to hear Mark Toner at the State Department talk about formal negotiations. That would be exactly the wrong thing to do. The Trump administration, I thought, made a very good move just a couple weeks ago, when we canceled the visas of two North Koreans who were coming over for what would be called informal talks, talks 1.5 or 2.0 in New York. They were set to take place through NGOs, and the Trump administration canceled the visas and said, enough. This was after the assassination of Kim Jong-nam. That's the right message to send, as a message of strength. One of the things the North Koreans want every single time from every single administration is this elevation to being the equal of the United States. They want this recognition. So, you know, like a child who misbehaves to get attention, they do these kinds of things. The worst thing you can do is reward them with the attention and the status that they seek.
We should point out that Mark Toner is, in fact, a holdover from the Obama administration as a spokesperson, deputy spokesperson, but he's holding that place until the new spokesperson gets in. Word is it's Heather Nauert from Fox News. I don't think that announcement's been made yet officially, so we'll wait for that. But that's just so that you see that's an Obama administration person. Matt, the question from Jake the Goose, who's a frequenter on SR Online. Why is China so hesitant to put down North Korea? Follow the money. What is the economic driver in this relationship? I mean, I'll answer some of that. I mean, China does not want North Korea to implode so that all of these people flood into China, which is dealing with its own growing pains of cities expanding and rural people moving into urban areas. They don't want North Korea to be another headache for them. But China has the leverage here.
Yeah, I think is interesting what Ambassador Nikki Haley said. Basically something along the lines of these are not rational people, which I think is, I don't know if that's what she should be saying, but I think it's what we all know. And we all know that the North Korean leader has killed everybody who's a potential political rival to him. And there is a little bit of insanity that goes through that family. And knowing that does not make anybody feel any better about the situation. And I think two presidents have failed to take on the biggest challenge on the globe. We talk a lot about terrorism, but the biggest challenge on the globe is the idea of nuclear proliferation. We've seen it in North Korea. We're going to see it in Iran, and Iran and North Korea are already working together. This is the biggest problem the globe faces, and we better get serious, and China has a big role to play.
New York Times, number 2, Trump plans for North Korea. Trump's aides say everything is on the table. China recently cut off coal imports from the north, but the United States is also looking at ways to freeze the Kim family's assets, some of which are believed to held in Chinese-controlled banks. The White House is also looking at preemptive military strike options, a senior Trump administration official said, though the challenge is huge when given the country's mountainous terrain and deep tunnels and bunkers. Putting American tactical nuclear weapons back in South Korea, they were withdrawn a quarter-century ago, is also under consideration, even if that step could accelerate an arms race with the North. I mean, boy, you sound out those options, Mara.
Every
None
one of them stinks.
Yeah.
Every one of them stinks. One of the reasons we put that THAAD battery in South Korea, that was supposed to make the South Koreans feel more secure. China doesn't like it because they think it's a way that we can spy on them. There are no good answers. And if you have somebody who isn't rational, then they're not subject to the usual pressures and incentives. You know, what exactly could China do? Cut off coal imports. Half the country is apparently starving anyway. This is a really difficult problem.
And we have to say, I mean, just for context, this has come as a result of failed diplomacy by three consecutive administrations. I mean, starting with the Clinton administration, where the idea was we elevate them, we include them in these talks, the agreed framework, and later
six-party talks.
Six-party talks. You elevate them, you give them this status, you essentially try to pay them off so that they don't develop nukes. They pretend that they're adhering to the agreement, and then you find out that they're not. And we've seen this, we've done this again and again and again, and it's why I'd be so skeptical of taking the diplomatic route yet again. I mean, it is, you know, to use the cliche, it is the Lucy and the football analogy. We've done this every single time, and I think Trump would be much better off to take a fresh look at this. And even those are unsavory options. In my view, they're all better than looking at the kinds of diplomacy that we've had in the past, which has failed.
I was told that President Obama, as he was leaving, told President Trump that this was the most urgent problem in the world and that it was the one that he was going to have to look most closely at. I was also told by a foreign minister from another country that the China coal thing, where they say they've blocked the coal, it's kind of hollow because they had already had their quota of coal in the country in China as they announced this holding off of getting coal. So it really didn't mean squat as far as leverage on North Korea. So we're back to square one, and here we have an administration that is dealing with this Russia stuff.
Right.
It has not filled all the spots in state, in defense.
No. It's not all the spots. It's almost none of the spots.
I mean, 1,200
second layer,
spots.
yeah.
The second layer.
Which is the operative layer. I mean, that's...
Right.
Right, no, I mean, let's just be clear. In all these agencies, almost all the slots are not filled. And this is, that's rather breathtaking. And it can take a long time to fill these slots. In the George W. Bush administration, we spent a year filling these slots. But those senior level slots, there was much more rapid progress. Because here's the problem for presidencies. What you think you're going to focus on after Election Day, turns out you end up focusing on very different things. And usually national security emergencies are what take over and are the hog on the agenda and a hog on your political capital. And if you don't have your people in these agencies, it is a dark place to be.
So what are they doing to change that?
What are they doing internally?
Yeah.
Well, they made some good announcements at DOJ with the Solicitor General and stuff, but they are in a little bit of a food fight between these secretaries and the White House, and they got to figure out the rules of the road and get past it, because there are big questions at stake here, and you can't be questioning what you're hearing from these agencies. It's got to be a clear channel.
And they've got to give these cabinet secretaries the ability to pick their number two. If you're going to vet everybody for if you ever wrote an editorial against Trump, you're out.
My only view on that, Mara, is decide what the rules of the road are and start following them, and quit fighting over what those rules are, because not filling these slots is not a viable alternative.
Well, and in some cases, I mean, you've got, as Deputy Secretary of Defense, for instance, Bob Work, who was President Obama's Deputy Secretary of Defense. And if you talk about the ongoing discussions of what's going to happen with the defense budget, Bob Work is for slashing the defense budget. I mean, that's what he was for when he worked for President Obama. He's apparently reached out to Democratic senators and made those arguments to them. So you can't have somebody as the number two in the Defense Department who's working against the president's interests. And now Work has gotten paid. They've nixed his other choices, and I think Matt is right. I mean, you're going to have to figure out what the rules are, begin to follow them, and push this quickly.
Fast.
Yeah.
All right, everybody is anxious to talk about health care here because they weren't satisfied with what we gave them in the first show. So what is the consensus here? Does something evolve, or does it look like what it looks like now?
It's going to evolve from what it looks like now.
More conservative?
Through the House. Look, the House, this is the way that it usually works when Republicans have the majority. You want the House version to be as conservative, as free market as it possibly can be, knowing that as it moves forward to the Senate, no offense to senators, it gets worse. And the majority is more narrow in the Senate. So I think there's a lot of conservatives that are saying what Paul Ryan came up with is almost what you would expect to see at the end of the process. And they want that process to start out much more conservative. If Paul Ryan was smart, he's going to allow these Freedom Caucus members to roll some amendments, have a pretty open rule, let them try to make it more conservative, knowing at the end of the day, it'll be senators that are weakening this bill.
Here's what I don't get. Why didn't they come out and say, listen, this is a three-phase process. Bear with us. Here's what phase 1 does. Here's what phase 2 does. Here's what phase 3 does. Here's the schedule where we plan to be on track to do 1, 2, and 3. All these people are questioning. Mike 90403. I don't understand. The health care bill phase 3 accounts for the open market component, yet pundits are complaining that the bill doesn't account for it. Why? Southern Sliver. Will federal tort reform be in Part 2 or Part 3 of the new health care plan? So, as I understand it, Mara, phase 1 is what they can get through in reconciliation.
With 51
phase
votes. 2
is what Secretary Price can do regulatory-wise. Remember the 19,000 pages of regulations that go along with the 2,700-page Obamacare bill? That's what he can start to peel back one after another there, phase 2. Phase 3, and those two can happen concurrently. Phase 3 is another piece of legislation that deals with crossing state lines, tort reform, and expanding HSAs.
Right. All sorts of things that don't fit into budget reconciliation.
Because why? Because it raises the deficit, and it's the Byrd rule in the Senate?
It's not a strictly budget-related bill. And that's what you need Democrats for, because you got to have 60 votes.
But see, they think everybody glazes over, but I think people would like to
people
know.
That's right.
People,
They want to know the game plan.
As Donald Trump said, it's complicated, and so explain it. And he's a great salesman. He has to start selling all the pieces. But the other thing that you hear from Mitch McConnell, you hear from the leadership in the Senate, that they're planning on taking what the House gives them and just passing it. Now that is almost unheard of. You know, you'd think, as Matt said, that it gets more moderate when it gets to the Senate, because you've got to get some of those moderate votes. You also have a little bit of a conservative rebellion in the Senate, Rand Paul and others. So I don't know if I would be very surprised if that happens. They take the House bill and they just pass it.
How does Rand Paul and Mike Lee not filibuster this thing?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's possible that you lose.
Right.
I think, yeah, they can't do that on the first piece. I think it's possible that you'll have conservative defectors on this at the end.
Well, I can't lose too many.
I think it's possible that if you take what has been presented.
You're saying on the Senate side or the House side?
Well, both. I mean, you're certainly going to have them on the House side. I think on the Senate side as well.
But more than 21
because yeah, I think you could easily have more than 21 of them. The problem, I mean, I think, you know, if you talk to rank-and-file Republicans who are not members of the Freedom Caucus, in some cases very hostile to the House Freedom Caucus, they will say, you know, I've talked to a couple of them, shrug their shoulders and say, this is it? Like, this is what we've been waiting 7 years for? Is this?
But then if they are sitting in a room and somebody says, listen,
right,
this is the deal. If you don't do this, we're not doing tax reform. You're not going to get home to say to the businesses that we've cut your taxes. You're not going to say X, Y, and Z, because it's going to all go to crap.
There are a lot of places and arguments that can be made to exert the kind of pressure that you're talking about. You will have people on the other side, like Mike Lee and Rand Paul and others, who will say, this really is Obamacare light. You've accepted the philosophical premise of Obamacare. You might be able to improve it in different parts. You might make it less painful.
But where is the
then
Reagan principle?
Republicans will own health care.
I got it. Where's the Reagan principle? And this is devil's advocate here, where you take the 80% loaf.
That's right.
You take what you can get,
that
and
is
you go. But what you're doing is you're standing up for basically the shut down the government principle that Ted Cruz and Mike Lee did during the standoff of the fiscal cliffs of before, which is they were standing on principle and ideology, and they were not going to break with that principle or ideology. If this is what they do to a Republican president, it's going to be interesting to see the fallout.
First, it's not clear where Donald Trump is, right? I mean, we've had his spokesman say that this is his bill. You've had Mike Pence suggest that this is his bill. Right. But he's also indicated that he's open to negotiation. I mean, he's literally said that. So I think you can expect that Donald Trump may not be a full-throated advocate for this particular bill if he spends more time with these conservatives, number one. And number two, I'd say
he wants the
argument,
Steve. He wants to win. He doesn't care what it looks like, does he?
I don't think so.
I mean, he wants the W. He wants to sign the piece of legislation.
Although I think he wants to be careful that he doesn't have people finding out what's in it and realizing they're going to lose their coverage.
But the counter argument, I mean, the argument the conservatives are making is not just sort of sticking on principle for the sake of sticking on principle and thumb in your eye if you don't agree with me. Some of them are actively making the argument that this would be worse, that the politics of the substance of this would be worse, and the politics of this could be dramatically worse if Republicans end up owning the collapsing. Obamacare is collapsing.
So here's RFC,
will Republicans try to improve it and fail and own that?
Brett, currently, my insurance costs for my family, me, my wife, and 3 kids, it went from $1,100 a month to $1,800 a month with a $6,000 deductible.
This is right.
Now, that person doesn't want Obamacare to continue.
Well, right. If that person would be, and we don't know enough about the circumstances to know if that person would benefit from these changes, but those are the stories that we should have heard. Donald Trump should have had somebody at the joint session.
Might I just say, if you're not getting a subsidy to buy your health insurance, do you know why your premiums have gone up so high? We all know why. Because you're paying for the people who are getting the subsidy.
Of course.
So the idea of the subsidies are more rational, that those premium increases wouldn't happen so rapidly, is something the Republicans have to square in their minds. You don't get to have it both ways. You don't get to say we're going to cover as many people as Obamacare has covered and tried to make the system better. Because if you just come up with a Republican version of covering as many people, you have the same problem.
But isn't that what they're saying?
No, I think this is a definite improvement.
But that is what they're saying. I mean, literally at the press conference this morning, forget who made the argument, maybe Poe. That was his case.
Well, Steve, my point would be is that Republicans, they're using the wrong benchmark. And the benchmark is that
I agree with that.
What is the premium shock that has hit families?
Totally agree with
and what's
that.
the impact on our health care?
But you know what? But you're saying they're falling into the trap of saying we have to cover everybody and we
They're
can't
going to lose
allow
that
anybody
argument.
That's exactly.
They'll lose that argument.
That's the point. Maybe I'm making the point poorly.
Maybe we're
apparently I'm making the point poorly.
President
That is my point. That was my
Trump
point on the
said he
show.
wanted insurance for everybody.
Right.
I mean, that's
This is the challenge.
pretty
And
hard.
Republicans, but then that means Republicans are fighting this argument on Democratic turf.
And they'll lose that
This is
argument.
where, if the debate is about access, and it's not about cost and quality of care and freedom of choice and all these things.
But
it's
what does access mean? Today,
But
Sean Spicer said insurance shouldn't be just a card; it should be about care. Access, does that mean you can go to an emergency room and get care? Anybody can do that now, before or after Obamacare.
Look, the basic question is that we have the best health care on the face of the globe. And what happened over Obamacare is we saw insurance companies exiting and we saw health professionals exiting. And that's something we have to immediately turn around, because we're not going to have the best health care on the globe. And what Obamacare was, it's important to keep reminding ourselves, it's about health insurance.
Right.
And the problem is it was expensive health insurance that was actually damaging the underlying health care. Republicans have to grab that issue of health care and start talking about health care again, and they can win this argument.
I guess what I'm not getting is what is the alternative that the conservatives have that can move quickly.
This is their fundamental problem. They don't have an alternative.
They've had 6 years.
Right.
This is the argument.
Just repeal, period.
This is the argument,
That's
which is
their alternative, is
they're
repeal,
saying that
period.
fundable tax credit is, in essence, it's just a transfer of wealth. It's not a tax credit. We call it a refundable tax credit. The government is writing a check to American families who can't afford their health insurance at the beginning of the year. It's like a reverse income tax. We're just going to give them money. And what they're saying is that's just an entitlement in another form, and they're opposed to that philosophically. It's a real fundamental question.
But it is a problem,
for example,
on a practical level, if they want to repeal, using the 2015 bill, and they just want to repeal and then sort of have the debate then, it is a real problem. First of all, you have issues with reconciliation, as was pointed out in the package. But then you're having this debate with all these people in limbo. I mean, this is where it's surprising to me that you didn't have more of that the conservatives didn't come up with more of a bridge plan,
right?
Something that they could offer.
That what this
because maybe they didn't
than,
really want a replacement. They wanted this status quo ante. They just wanted it gone, and that's what they've been voting for 7 years.
They want to get rid of the mandates. They want to get rid of the taxes. They want to get rid of the
look
minimum
at what
insurance
happens
policies.
to businesses. The whole thing about you can't hire more than 50 people, that goes away, which is a stifling businesses that literally were at 49 people because they didn't want to go to 50 and have to be stuck on this deal. And there's a number of other things that the HHS Secretary has power with in Phase 2.
Correct.
And one would think in Phase 3 that market forces drive down costs if you have a national database in which you can pick insurance plans that cross all state lines. One would think that there is some competition in there.
Right. I don't think you're hearing from conservatives that this plan on substance wouldn't be preferable to Obamacare. But what you're hearing is it's not what they promised. It's not what they argued for years.
It's akin to Obamacare. It's a Republican version.
It accepts the philosophical underpinnings of Obamacare, and importantly, and this I think we can't lose sight of this fact, it means then Republicans are the Republicans' own health care. If you pass something like this, and if it is effectively Obamacare light, it shifts the burden, and it's unfair. And look, I think the media coverage of this has been horrendous. I mean, it is like Obamacare is. There's a great cartoon by Michael Ramirez, great cartoonist, and he's got Obamacare as a plane that's lost like half of its fuselage, and it's hitting the ground, and somehow Republicans are responsible for flying it, for recovering. It's ridiculous,
But once you start down the road,
that's where I think the president and in particular Tom Price and Republicans in Congress have done a poor job of telling this story. Tell the story. Tell that story. I mean, there are stories
I get
out there.
it. They're going to tell the stories. There's going to be all kinds of ads. There'll be millions of dollars spent on stuff. But if you can't get through the head that doing something better
That's right.
is better,
That's right.
and that you have to, in principle, stand on all or nothing, then how are we as a country going to get to any big legislative win?
wait till he
Ever.
asks for $1 trillion of infrastructure that explodes the deficit.
The answer to the question I think you're asking is the following, which is that you have a legislative process for a reason, and what they have to do is have a big, vigorous debate where all sides feel like they can influence it, and then a lot of conservatives are going to realize, hey, this is the best we're going to do. I'm not saying the current version is the best, but eventually they're going to realize this is the best we're going to do. That's your 80% of the loaf moment. We're just not there yet.
Yep. So they lose fair and
But
square.
boy, it
on
would have been
amendments.
smart to include the conservatives from the outset.
Would have been nice to have been. Would have been nice to have been briefed. Did you get your briefing packet before?
No.
Yeah, I didn't either. Did you get yours?
I did, actually.
Did you?
No, I'm just kidding. We did have Chairman Brady and Chairman Walden on when they rolled it out, though. That was good. Special Report Online is back. What do you think? It was your inaugural run.
My hand has stopped shaking, so
Yeah.
it's really good.
Well, we'll get the bar right over here. Okay, Steve Mara, Matt, thank you. Thank you. We'll see you next Wednesday. Control room, a little goodbye.